Welcome back to our Bible study. This is installment 2 of 7 as we break down the churches that John writes to in the book of Revelation. I'm John Evans. I'm back with Gabe Ross. And this second installment, we're going to look at the church at Smyrna. Yep. And that's in Revelation chapter 2. If you're following along with us, we're in Revelation chapter 2. We're going to begin reading in verse 8. And we're going to break it down as we have so far in this pattern that we have conducted of the Bible study. So let's look at that together. Revelation 2, verse 8, it says this: "To the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of him who is the first and the last, who died and came to life again."
All right, so this characteristic, they all have meaning. The first one we talked about, Jesus having the power to hold the churches.
Sure.
This is really important. So you're going to get into in a minute about where they are positionally as believers.
Right.
They're in a city that's very wealthy,
right.
And according to the world, we as Christians are considered poor a lot of times, and so they're going to be poor in this sense, but also physically as well. And the reason that's important is you're going to talk about their persecution. So Smyrna has the meaning of myrrh. That's what it means.
Right.
So if you remember back at the very beginning when Jesus was brought into the world, he's brought a couple of gifts.
Yep.
One of those is myrrh, right? And so myrrh is this fragrance. Well, it's a fragrance that when it's crushed, it brings about more of the smell and the fragrance. So Smyrna means myrrh, and myrrh means suffering.
Right.
And the church of Smyrna is about to be called to suffer.
Sure.
And so Jesus died, and he was crushed, right? He was crucified and crushed. And so that sacrifice became a beautiful offering and fragrance to the Lord.
Yeah.
And so it was him giving his life to be this fragrance. And in the same way, the people of Smyrna are about to be called to the same thing. So remember that. There's this one who died, but is alive, and this one who will endure to the end. It has meaning and implication for this church as well.
That's good. Yeah, that's really good. And that's going to hold implications through this.
Oh, for sure.
As he's writing to this specific church here. Okay, let's read together verse 9. Again, this is the I know statement. "I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you're rich. I know the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan."
Yeah. So they're in a place where it's very dangerous to be a Christian.
Okay.
So they're under persecution. All the churches are. And the emperor has instituted this thing where they have to say Caesar is Lord.
Yeah.
A little bit like Daniel had to do with Nebuchadnezzar, right? And so they all have to do this. And so there's this danger of persecution, of being oppressed and experience suffering. And so he says, "I know your afflictions, and I know you feel like you're poor, but you're rich. I know they're going to slander you." So they've got on these two sides. They've got the people of Smyrna trying to oppress them and slander them for not speaking out and saying Caesar is Lord. And then they have this huge population of Jews who are always coming at the people of Jesus, right? In the Old Testament and the New Testament, they're coming at the people of Jesus. And the idea of Judaism and religion is pushing down on Christianity. And so these people who are trying to be believers in Smyrna are at danger from the government and from the religious side of Judaism. And so he tells them, "I want you to endure. I know that you are struggling. I know that you are being oppressed and crushed. But remember, Smyrna means myrrh, and myrrh means suffering. And when that myrrh is crushed, it becomes a beautiful fragrance. So the more you are crushed, the more you're oppressed, the more you're persecuted, just know it is a blessing to God." And what's happened throughout all of history, when the people of God are oppressed, they grow, and the faith and the knowledge and the understanding of God begins to permeate throughout the world, which is what a fragrance does when you crush it. It permeates. And so he says, I know you're being oppressed, but it will lead to the gospel being spread among the people you're around.
Yeah, this idea of beauty from ashes, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. What Jesus does for us. All right, let's continue to read. We're going to read the first half of verse 10 here. It says, "Don't be afraid of what you're about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you'll suffer persecution for 10 days."
Yeah.
Fun.
Yeah, a whole lot of fun, right? And so they did experience that.
Yeah.
Historically, they did. And this is where you have to be careful of where you apply the future tense of these things. So some people would say, well, that's the future tribulation.
Yeah.
It's not.
Right.
It's not, because he's about to say that in just a minute. They're not going to experience that. But it's this upcoming persecution of living in that country, that region, with those people.
Right.
So for the next 250 years, they're going to experience persecution. under the Roman government, under different emperors. They're going to experience that. So
Right.
10 days, a day to God is like 1,000. So
Right.
it's hard to draw the exact number, but he's saying it'll be short. It won't be long lived. It won't be forever. 10 days, if you think about it, that's not long to be in prison, even though it's difficult. He's telling them as believers the same thing. You will suffer, but it will not be forever. So 1 Peter chapter 1, I really wanted to put in the message Sunday, but just for time had to leave out.
Right.
So that's what Peter says. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, for a little bit, if necessary, you've been grieved by various trials. It's so that the genuineness of your faith would be tested, which then is more precious than gold, and it won't perish, even though it's put under fire, and it will be found to result in the praise and glory of Jesus Christ. So I think the combination of that with that idea of myrrh and suffering, he's telling them, you will suffer for a little while, but it has purpose.
Right.
You will be that fragrance. Your faith will be genuine. So all the false believers will be burned by the fire of persecution, but this church will remain as a true testament of me.
So again, so much application there, right? Like we have to hold on to statements like that. As Jesus is looking here, he's saying, listen, hold on. Hold on. Understand these things are going to happen, but hold on. He's supposed to say this in the second half of verse 10. Let's read that together. It says, be faithful even to the point of death.
Yeah.
And he says, and I'll give you the crown of life. So I'm going to stop right there because, again, I want to speak to that, just how important that is for us as believers. And I've preached on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel. I've preached on those many times in my ministry.
Right.
And I say just about every time I preach on that, don't be surprised if you see this type of persecution in your lifetime. And we're getting closer to that, friend.
Yeah.
So statements like this, where we've got to hold on to be faithful, even to the point of death.
Right.
You got to hold on to stuff like that because there's a crown of life that awaits.
Yeah, and so that crown is for those who are victorious, those who endure. And so he's saying that you're not going to experience that second death.
Right.
That you will bypass that.
Yeah.
And so what that really is that at the end of Revelation, there's this great tribulation where God's going to come and judge unrighteousness. And he's telling them, because of your faith in me, if you endure, you don't have to taste that death.
Yeah.
You don't have to experience that because you've tasted life. Even if you experience death physically and hold to your faith, that's more genuine, and you won't have to experience that death. It brings to mind what Paul says, if I'm to live, I'm going to live for Christ. Yeah. But if I die, I'm going to see Jesus. Yeah, it's gain for me. Yeah. And that's the same thing for them. I think the encouragement, keep on with the faith that you have. Make sure it's genuine, because I will crush you just like I crushed my son. Yeah. And through that crushing, this fragrance comes and spreads throughout the world. Same thing will happen with you. They won't know what to do with you. They won't know what to do with your genuine faith. But if you endure, you don't have to taste the death that they're going to experience, because you're going to get that crown of life.
Yeah, and let's read that, because that's what you've alluded to a couple of times here. And he says this statement that he says to all the churches, he that has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. He who overcomes will not be hurt at the second death.
Yeah, that's that great tribulation in Revelation chapter 20 that everybody's going to experience that's not walking with him. And so they don't have to worry about that. They don't have to experience that. And so we think the worst thing in the world is physical death.
Right.
But for Jesus, the worst thing in the world was separation from God, which was spiritual death. And so because we don't have that sin reigning in us anymore, and we have the power and ability through Christ to endure, we don't have to experience that. We're not separated from God any longer. Who can separate us? There's no height nor depth. There's no power, no demon, no angel. Nothing can separate us from God. We're bound and joined with him through Christ and the Holy Spirit. So we don't have to taste that. There's nothing that can remove us. No amount of persecution or suffering or even physical death can remove us from that. And that's the most genuine thing we could ever experience.
This is so good. And again, application, right? Like, you have to read yourself into these specific churches that John's writing to here, because there's a couple of things, right? There's encouragement, as is here to the church of Smyrna, and then there's conviction, like Ephesus and some of these other churches that we're going to read and look through. And so just important to read yourself into that, and then just let God and the Holy Spirit work in and through you to see where you may need encouragement or you may need correcting in some way. So we're so glad that you joined us for this second installment as we looked at the church of Smyrna, and then as we continue to walk through the book of Revelation in our Alpha and Omega series. And we can't wait to see you in our next installment.